All right, Ed, welcome to the Micro Collector podcast. I am super excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me, Justin. Big pleasure.
Yeah, not only am I a massive fan of your watches and what you're doing, your mission, but I found out in the process of learning about Split that you and I have some history, a connection. As it turns out, our grandfathers started a joint venture back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s in the watch industry. And here we are 3 generations later chatting on a podcast about watches. So, it's a small world out there.
The power of the watch, I think, Justin, it can bring people together.
Absolutely. Totally. And as I mentioned, I'm just a huge fan of what you're doing. So excited today to dig into your vision, your mission, your history, and how you got to where you are today. So maybe to start the conversation today, for those that aren't familiar with you, they're not familiar with Split, maybe give us a little bit of a background. I know you've been in the watch industry for some time, so maybe a little bit of your journey and how you got to the point where now you're starting your own watch brand with Split.
Brilliant. So I'm, as you've mentioned, a third generation watchmaker, and grew up at a time when you were still very much expected to join the family business. There wasn't really any other option. I went to Switzerland to do my training. I worked at the Longines factory in Saint-Imier. Literally, I think it's a small little town, and everyone there was working for the Longines factory. I got the chance to meet some very interesting people, and I got the chance to learn about what the manufacturer goes through in their journey, because at the time our family had a importing business. We were importing a lot of luxury watches into the UK, so I wanted to get an overview of the journey of a watch. So I worked at Longines trying to understand the ropes from a manufacturer. I worked a short time with Vacheron, a short time with Piaget. I then wanted to also find out the journey a watch goes through from a retail point of view. So I took a couple of weeks away to work at 2 very differing retail shops. There was one called Asprey's, and at the time they had a couple of very interesting clients who loved watches, thankfully. They were the Sultan of Brunei and his brother. So I got to see that side of what a retailer does with the journey of a watch. I then did a training at a place called Ratner's, which I don't think you would have heard of. It hasn't been around for a while. It was a very successful shop. It was more of the low end of the watch industry and jewelry. And the owner was on a talk show in the UK, and they said, "How can you make these watches and this jewelry so cheaply?" And he said, "Because it's basically crap." And his business nosedived the day after, and he disappeared quite quickly. So there I was. I'd done my training and I joined the business, something I'll explain about a bit later. But I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because I was there for certain reasons rather than others. And in a way, it was quite good because I really had to prove myself and work that much harder. We as a company were distributing at the time Baume & Mercier, we were distributing Girard-Perregaux, we were distributing Breguet, Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet, to name a few. I mean, we really were the distributor for Swiss brands in the UK, with the exception of Rolex and Patek, which was a shame. Never quite managed that one. So I was given Girard-Perregaux as the first brand to distribute into the UK. And I was very lucky. And about 4 weeks into my job, I absolutely loved the brand. And that was one brand that made me realize the people behind the product are very important in how the product eventually gets created. So I met a guy called Gino Macaluso, and he had ties to the racing industry. He was one of the kindest, nicest people I had the chance of meeting. As I said, just after I'd taken on the brand, it was a very challenging brand to sell in the UK at the time. They signed up with Ferrari to make a Girard-Perregaux Ferrari watch, so it made my job a lot easier. We went from strength to strength. I think we did a exhibition in the UK and we sold out within 2 days. So I had to rush to Switzerland and plead with them for more product. So I earned my stripes, so to speak, a little bit. And then we had Frank Muller. I took on Frank Muller and I took on 1 or 2 other brands. And then we get a phone call from this gentleman called Jean-Claude Biver, who a lot of people didn't know at the time. And he had a little briefcase with him. He couldn't make watches in gold because he didn't have the money to make watches in gold. So he only had a collection of steel watches in a briefcase. And if you've anyone out there who's never heard of him, look him up. Jean-Claude Biver. He's one of the biggest characters I've ever met in my life, and most certainly in the watch industry. And he inspired me a lot, actually. He had such emotion behind the product. And I was desperate to know what was in that bag after speaking to him for about half an hour. Thankfully, the watches were really nice. He had a really clear and clean philosophy. He would never make a quartz watch. He had a classic look on his watches, and he made them in 6 complications. So this briefcase had the 6 complications. I took Blancpain on, absolutely loved him, loved the brand, and it stayed with me a lot. I fully immersed myself in the history of the brand, the 50 Fathoms, and a few other watches. So I was doing very well. I've no idea. I don't know if I can take any credit. I think I was at the right place at the right time. And then the gentleman who had been looking after Audemars Piguet for the brand, and that was our sort of cherry on the top of the cake, that brand. He retired, and I think I pretty much earned it. So I took on Audemars Piguet.
This is amazing. I was going to say, and I want you to finish the walk through that. I just finished a really great book called The Business of Time that's about the history of the watch business. And I feel like your story parallels not the earliest parts, right, of the watch industry, but the parts, in my opinion, that got really interesting because the brands I started to recognize. And, there was a time where some of these brands like the Audemars Piguets and so on were almost like micro brands where the founders of these companies played a big role in the story of the brand and so on. There was a face behind it, as you said. So I don't want to stop you. Keep going. This is beautiful.
Well, it's interesting actually, but every single brand always has to have a day one.
Yeah,
And however
true.
big they are, including Rolex, Patek, everyone has to start at the very bottom of the ladder and work their way up. So, and that applies to everyone. So yeah, including those almighty brands like Rolex and Patek. But it's a fascinating industry. Been very lucky. I've met a lot of very fascinating people, and I still marvel to this day, actually, that in such a small space, you can create 150,000 versions of the same thing. So yeah, it shows how creative we are as a human race and how we can inject our own personalities into something so small. Just sort of rewinding a little bit. So I had this big smile on my face the whole time. And as I mentioned, I felt a little bit like an imposter, even though at the end of a certain part of my career in the watch industry, I'd been highly successful. I think the smile is something I can talk about maybe at a later time. I don't know if whenever suits, but that's an intrinsic part of my second journey in the watch industry, which was very different to my original journey in the watch industry.
Yeah, before we get into Split and that journey, people listening to that story, especially to this podcast, watch enthusiasts are going to say, man, that sounds like a dream life, a dream job. Maybe they can't feel that imposter syndrome. I can relate to it. So as I mentioned, 3rd generation in the watch industry, I actually, right out of college, went a completely different direction, and went into tech and went and did my own thing. And now a little bit older, a little bit more mature, maybe at that time, I can look inside and be like, oh, there was probably some imposter syndrome there that was pushing me in that direction. So different, I guess, action, same reaction as you. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. Like, what were some of the things about that experience that caused you to take a pause? Because I know you took some time away from the industry before launching Split. So maybe you can talk about what caused that. And then maybe that time period, right? That in between time period where you sounds like, I mean, I'd love to hear from you, but it sounds like there was an experience there where you maybe discovered yourself a little bit, discovered what drives you, what's important to you. And I can feel that in your new brand, right? And Split. So I think it'll be really interesting to hear about that period of time.
With pleasure. Um, Yeah, I just going to rewind very, very quickly though. But a little journey on foot I had that made a big impression on the life ahead of me was I used to work for the family business in school holidays, and I took this little cardboard box in a plastic bag to a retailer, and I opened it up, and there must have been 6 fully baguette set Piagets, the old King Callas, the Piaget polos, and that's when I kind of realized that my journey would be quite an interesting one. But in answer to your question, I had some trauma as a kid, and in hopefully wise old age I am now, I'm starting to realize that it wasn't an exclusive journey for me, and a lot of us go through it in some form, in some way, at some point. So I had this smile on my face. It was my coping mechanism. I did it at the sort of dinner table at home and wherever I was. I'd always hide or mask what was truly going on inside of me with a big smile on my face. So I carried that into the watch industry. So there was a lot that truly inspired me. There's some incredible people, and mentioning brands that we distributed, we also distributed some micro brands at the time, actually new micro brands. You had the likes of MB&F. So I was dealing we were the only point of entry for the UK for MB&F and Max Buster, another really interesting guy I have a lot of respect for actually in the industry. Grubel Force, All Work. So yeah, so seeing their journey start, and it's quite incredible where they've got to these days. But then going back to me and my smile, there was a lot I loved about the industry, but there was also a lot I found very, very challenging to deal with. There was a lot of status and ego in the industry. I was dealing at the very highest end, but unfortunately, there was a lot of status and ego that went on with the products that I was selling. And it was something that I never felt comfortable with. And I always struggled with it, actually. And it frustrated me. And there was something that just didn't work with me at all. And I actually struggled to deal with that side of the industry. So I have some kids, and then maybe my childhood trauma um, kicks in a little bit stronger, and I could hardly deal with my family life, let alone my work life. And I had to take a very long sabbatical from the industry at the very top of what I was doing. I'd also, by the way, was running a shop in London called Marcus, the very highest end watch retailer in the UK, very successfully. But I had to prioritize myself, and I had to leave the industry. It took me a long time to find myself again, and I can talk a little bit about that journey if you're interested now or later. But it's a journey, I think, unfortunately, that a lot of us have to go through at some point. And I'd always hidden behind that smile, and it had always caused me great pain to hide behind a smile. And it made me rethink everything. And everyone had always said you were so brave to have that smile on your face. But for me, I've kind of flipped it a little bit. And I think bravery is when you actually can talk about it and you can address it and you can move on with it, and they're like these big sacks of potatoes that a lot of us have. Again, some smaller, some bigger, and they weigh us down, and no one can see them. They're invisible to everyone but ourselves. And we walk around with this heavy weight. And so I'll tell you a little story. So I didn't used to talk about it a lot. And I used to go drop my kids off to school. Again, I had my big smile on my face, and then I'd disappear and cry for a couple of hours. It was really challenging to deal with the trauma I was experiencing. And then one day, someone at the school gates, everyone was so beautifully dressed, always smiling, even though it was like 8 in the morning or whatever. Someone asked me how I was doing. And, we always say I'm okay when we're struggling, or I'm good when we're okay. We tend to sort of mask it a little bit. And I'd had enough of masking it. And I said, I'm really struggling. We went and had a coffee, and I sort of opened myself up a bit. And that was when I started realizing that vulnerability can be a huge strength and not a huge weakness. And especially for us men, I think we sort of grow up seeing our parents. I'm a different generation, I'm a bit older, but it was that whole alpha thing with a man, and how you don't, you've got to show strength. And so when I opened myself up a little bit, this other person I was talking to, and it wasn't a total stranger, it was someone who I became an acquaintance over the years, and they were so relieved when they were looking at me. I could almost see them taking their potatoes off their shoulders. And she turned around to me, this person who I thought had this perfect life. And she was telling me how for the last 2 days she's been looking for her younger brother who was a heroin addict, and a little bit more about her life and how she's struggling. So I started talking to a few more people who I'd known, some I know well, including friends. Like, sometimes you don't share these things with friends. And there's so many stories that have cropped up since I started this brand that made me realize a lot of us do actually sort of keep everything very enclosed, even with our closest and our dearest. And that can be very damaging. So I started talking to people more. I sort of got the tools to overcome my trauma. And anyone out there, for me, it was forgiveness. I I learned to forgive and understand that people do certain things. They may have had their own issues to deal with as well. So I'm on the sort of, this was an 8-year journey. I ended up, my wife was working very hard. I ended up, I was the primary carer for our little baby, who had been born, a beautiful little girl who had an older brother. And I wasn't quite ready to go back into the watch world. I was I had a little moment when I was about 49, 50, where I started feeling much better. And my wife is prodding me in the nicest possible way and encouraged me to do something with my life. And I had a good look at myself. And the two things I understood really well were watches and mental health. And that's when Split came along. And so I started to create a brand that I thought was a sort of, although I respect a lot tradition, I didn't want to get sucked into certain aspects of the watch industry that didn't work for me, and I don't think worked for other people as well. Um, and I wanted to create something different. And I realized, I had a really good, honest look at myself and at the whole industry and everything. And there were certain questions I asked myself, like, the luxury industry is 70% of the watches are steel based. So there I am questioning, is steel a luxury item? For me, not necessarily. And I've actually since um, looked up on very many different, whether Chat GPT, AI, or Google's, or anything I could find. And the definition of luxury is actually changing day on day. And I mean, if we've got time, I can read it to you, but it's now more about meaning, luxury, than anything else. Um, so I wanted to make a different watch. Didn't want to go and just be another Swiss watch brand with a steel shiny bracelet. It would have made my life very much easier had I have done that. But I really felt the need to do something differently and to get people thinking. And I always saw the power a watch had to start a conversation. From the very first day I joined the industry, it was very apparent that these watches, again, possibly a little bit more for men than women, because we don't have as many ways to show our creativity and who we are to other people. So I worked for about a year finding the best materials. So, for example, I'll show you a watch here. So we use an FKM rubber strap, which is it's the most complicated process to create rubber, but it's the most incredible rubber. It's very malleable. It's a very angry rubber because it's anti everything. It does sweat, bacteria, absolutely everything. And it's got a very soft feel and it's malleable. So it folds really nicely onto your wrist like a good pair of shoes. I think Richard Mille, Hublot, and a few other watch brands use FKM in their watches. I then worked on a case for the watch. So again, I didn't want to be another watch brand. There are so many watch brands in the industry, and I really felt if we're going to try and make a difference, we have to do it with every aspect of the watch, the materials, everything. So we created this material, which is a fusion of ceramides, polymers, nylons, and we created this it's a very soft case. It's quite scratch resistant, and it's got a lovely soft feel. It's heat resistant as well. So if you're very hot and it's hot outside, it won't go into the case. If it's very cold, the case won't get cold. And pushing through on what I was trying to do, I've always loved the old Solita movement. I was a big fan of the old Hoya watches, especially there's a lovely 2-register chrono, which has been a big inspiration for me as well. And since I used to love the old Hoya watches, the Solita company had been bought out by one of the large corporations in Switzerland. And I've always loved Japan. I think Japan is an interesting concept to put behind the watch. I think it's a clearer statement for what I'm trying to do. I also absolutely loved Seiko. I've always loved Seiko, and I think it's a big sleeping giant. They're not really as good at marketing as the Swiss are. And I can tell you just a mini story. I asked, so I don't know if you can see
Yeah,
here.
maybe I'd love for you to show. Yeah, perfect. And then maybe show the face of the watch as well, because
I've got a,
one
I shall show you I've got a protective sticker on here. This is,
absolutely beautiful. One thing that I love about watch brands is when they have a very distinct brand language where when you see it across the room, you know that that's a split watch. You're like, oh, that guy's got a split, and your watch is one of those watches where I've seen it now since I saw it for the first time. I've seen it a couple of times in the wild on Instagram and in various other places, and it always catches my attention. And the other thing about it, this now that you've told me a little bit more about your story, I can see it in the brand, right? You know, people that are wearing these watches, they're making a statement that goes beyond the watch, right? There's a story behind why they're wearing it and what it stands for, which is really, really interesting, I
I'm
think.
going to show that's the idea of the brand exactly. So um, I'm going to just show you one thing. So this is just a little version
Yeah.
of our new
Yep.
watch in the skies. But if you have a look at the dial, so the hands are set to 7:23. So in the watch industry, for as long as I can remember, the time is always 10 past 10. And there's a little subconscious smile going on there. And the watch is actually potentially a more appealing if you see a happy face rather than a sad face. But our story is very true. And so what I've done is all of our watches will only ever be promoted at 7:23. And through that, I'm just trying to say, if you're having a bad day, there's nothing wrong with having a bad day, and you don't need to hide it. You can tell people that having a bit of a bad day today. We don't need to always have a big smiley face because it doesn't always help. So that's one aspect of what we're doing with the watch and how we're trying to incorporate our message through the watch. It's again about we don't want polished, shiny things, and we specifically made a watch that didn't shine. We made a watch and it was really interesting. I hadn't expected it actually. So this is a 2 reg chrono. I've always loved a 2 reg chrono. And when we were going through the design process, my watch designer was telling me, Ed, you need to put more information on the dial because, again, it's a subconscious process. But when we see lots of numbers and information, we equate that to complicated and worthy of the price we're paying. And I didn't want to go down that road. I wanted as much clarity on the watch as possible. And maybe it's a reflection of the mind instead of, it's not always good to be busy all the time. It's good to have a bit of clarity within the busyness. So we also, for example, with every watch we sell, we donate an hour's therapy to our charity partner, Anna Freud, and they look after youths in need. Kids who don't have a safe space to talk, can't go to their parents maybe, or can't go to their mates, and they're really suffering. So it's a safe place for them to talk.
This is great. I mean, what I love so much about your story and your brand is that this is a watch that you can feel good about buying. You know, to your point earlier, there's a lot of status in the watch industry. And yes, when you buy a high end luxury watch, I can't say that I have done it yet. I'm not quite there yet, right? I bought some nicer, let's say micro brands, but I would assume that there's a moment where you do feel good about it, but over time it sort of maybe fades a little bit and then you are going after and chasing that next thing. I feel like this is a watch where that feeling of confidence and satisfaction you can feel every time you wear the watch. And especially if you see somebody else that recognizes the watch or asks you about the watch or is wearing the watch as well, you have that moment that maybe is similar to the feeling that you felt when you were talking to your friend and for the first time you talked about how you weren't feeling great and she shared as well that she wasn't feeling great and you realize that there's more people out there feeling like that sense of connection. And I think that that's what you're going for with the watch and it's beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to wear it and tell absolutely everyone. This is the reason I hope as a watch it stands on its own 2 feet anyway behind the backstory. And I just thought I'd share very quickly and then I'll answer that question. So I just wanted to share one photo with you. So there's something about Japan that appealed to me and the Seiko movement and NE86, it's quite a revolutionary movement. And for me, it was a better movement and a more interesting movement than my Swiss equivalent. So we went all guns blazing, made in Japan, and I think it sort of summed up a lot about the brand as well. There's other aspects to the brand I haven't spoken about. So it's kind of, and you mentioned it about this togetherness. It's so important. So musically, we have a lot of references within the brand. They've been very subtle thus far. Like for example, this is our MC5, and so we have the MC1, 2, 3, and 4, and that was our original collection, finishing with an MC5, and that was a little nod to an American pump band called MC5, and apologies for my language, they had a song called Kick Out the Jams, Motherfucker. And it just worked quite well because it's about jamming and that noise for the sake of noise, which was a good fit for us. But moving forward, we're bringing out a GMT range, and mental health will be at the core. But we're going to try this year to flip a bit mental health from a negative word to a positive word. And we're going to try and tell that story through the medium of music and those moments that we all have in our lives where we all come together to go and listen to music. And I was speaking to a friend about it yesterday. It's like, you go to a concert to see someone you really like. Yes, you're going to have a great time. If you're the only person in the audience, you'll still have an incredible time. But to get that feeling when you've got people around you who are experiencing that moment with you, it heightens your own experience, and it's all about togetherness. And for me, it was quite exciting. With the GMT, we're leaning very heavily on those seminal moments in music that were important to me, and I believe were important to quite a lot of other people. So you had a little bit, I'm old, but I'm not this old, but you had like the birth of blues in the Delta, and you've got like Elvis suddenly shaking his hips, and you've got people in the crowd and police, they're not allowed to dance. And that was quite a countercultural moment for me, even from someone like Elvis. He pushed us and music into a new exciting place, like punk has done it, like grunge has done. You know, Kurt Cobain was made a big difference as well in my life. So we're going to tie this in a bit more about that emotion of togetherness and make people realize that when you're on a journey, you are not by yourself, you are not alone. And the reality is, you know, if you're in a crowded room, a lot of people will be going through what you're going through. And one or two may be hiding behind a smile or hiding somehow with whatever means they need. And I think there's such a positivity about knowing that we're all so much more connected than we feel sometimes.
Yeah, I'm a big music fan as well, and I'm maybe a little bit different in that I love older music, a lot of I actually don't know a lot of the newer stuff. I listen to everything from blues. I am a guitar player, so I listen to, Robert Johnson, like old school blues, all the way through, Clapton, obviously, and Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, Nirvana even, and, one band that kind of represented a little bit of me growing up was Oasis, and this past year, I had the experience of going with my son, with my 8-year-old son who also plays guitar and is very into music, to see
Yeah.
them in Los Angeles. It was the most amazing musical experience I've ever had because I think that everybody that was there had grown up listening to this band and, never thought that they would come together again. And it was one of those moments where you're with I don't remember how many people it was, but, uh, I think it was like 90,000 people or something crazy like that, right? All singing the lyrics all at the same time. People that you don't know, you're turning around to and you're singing to them. And it was that connection. And I think what's really beautiful about what you're doing is you're weaving these really interesting things that can seem separate, but in fact are related, right? You've got the connection of mental health and how we all go through things. You've got the connection of music, and you've got the connection of watch enthusiasts and watch lovers. And, I've seen a lot of brands that do one or the other. They'll have a great story, but maybe it's not a very technical watch. And then I've seen other watches that are highly technical but don't have much of a story beyond the technical aspect, right? And a meaning, right, beyond that. And I think the way that you've been able to balance these things where this watch has a lot of meaning, it represents so much, but at the same time, you're using new materials, you're pushing the boundaries of what a watch can look like. You've got a movement in there that is impressive, right? Is really, really unique how you've been able to combine those things. And as somebody
Thank
that
you.
loves humans, loves music, and loves watches, I think this is the perfect watch.
I'm going to show. Thank you. That's a huge compliment. Thank you. So this is just to share. So this is, I'll scroll down, but it's got 4 patents on it. The movement. Yeah, it's a beauty and very reliable. Thankfully, we haven't had um, any problems with our watches so far. So yeah, we've created something that's yeah, I didn't want to be, if this watch features on a page with 10 other watches within an article, it needs to stand out. And I wouldn't have been able to create the story I'm trying to create had I made this Swiss watch, this shiny Swiss watch with a steel bracelet. And my bank manager would have been happier. The charity would have been happier because I would have raised more money. But we're trying to do it very organically and properly. We don't want to cut corners, and we want to be as authentic as possible.
Well, Ed, I really appreciate you coming on, being open as I know you have in articles I've read and so on. So I was very excited to chat today, but being open with your story, your journey, and for doing what you're doing, because I think it's really, really important work. Um, you mentioned a couple of things that are coming soon, the GMT. I think you just released a new version of the current watch, In the Skies, right? That which full lume as well, which is
Well, I can actually
amazing.
show you if you want. I need to become like a DJ doing a rave or something, because it will, just to show you. So that little part that I've just loomed up. So the whole thing, including the case, it's the whole watch glows, just to show. And I show you just very quickly. So the end result, when it's quite strange because you forget that your watch is lume sometimes, and you're sort of in the evening when things are getting a bit darker, and you're going out of a room with light, going into to check on your kids or whatever, and the room's a little bit darker, and suddenly you see this thing on your wrist glowing. It's quite fun, and we're trying to have fun actually. That's I think an important word. I think a lot of people take themselves and their watches too seriously. I think we've got a very high quality watch using very high grade modern materials. It doesn't mean we need to be so serious about it. And I think it's maybe a little reflection on me, and um, trying to have fun and authentically smile as often as possible.
Well, as I said, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your story, for sharing your watches. I know that there are going to be people listening, watching this that are excited to check out the watches, to learn more. Where are a couple places that people can go to learn more, follow you on your journey, and buy the watches as well?
So we're currently online only. I think that's something I will look at in the next 1 or 2 years, finding a few key resale partners, because I think people like to physically hold a watch sometimes and feel it.
So online, coming to stores in the next couple of years. And I think you also are pretty active on social media as well, sharing stories.
So yeah, we're www.splitwatches.com, and we are on the socials. Mostly, I think we're on Instagram, and then we're on all the other X and Twitter, not Twitter anymore, X and Facebook, but predominantly we're pushing through on Instagram.
Great. Well, I'll include some links in the show notes. So anybody listening, watching that wants to learn more, I can check out. I'm going to share the article as well, if you don't mind, the FT article that I read that helped me first discover you guys, because I think it really paints a beautiful picture on what you're building. Ed, thanks so much for coming on,
Thank
for
you for
chatting
having
with us
me.
here today.
And
And
well done you, by the way. I think you've done amazing, and it's really exciting. Hopefully we'll both see our journeys grow together, as our grandparents probably did.
absolutely. And I'd love to get, at some point, I'm going to get one of those watches on my wrist, and I'm going to be wearing it at a concert and having it full boom like that. I
Perfect.
just had
Good.
that vision.
We can go to a concert together.
Sounds great.